Okay, so have you ever, like, totally choked on a test? Or wondered why that one kid in your class seems to always be chill no matter what's going on?
Well, yeah, it's all about emotions, right? And how we connect with each other, which I guess is kind of a big deal when you think about it.
It's like the core of being human, isn't it?
Yeah.
In this deep dive, we're going to break down emotional development and how it connects to attachment across the lifespan. We're talking from the moment you're born all the way through those crazy teenage years and into adulthood and even old age.
Yeah, and to really get into this, we've looked at a ton of research, like psychology studies and things about how humans develop emotionally.
Our goal here is to, like, pull out the most important stuff about how our feelings and our bonds with each other make us who we are. We want to keep it clear and simple, no crazy jargon, and trace how these things evolve as we grow and how much they impact us.
Right. Sounds good.
All right,
Well,
so let's start at the beginning. What even are emotions? Why are they such a big deal?
Well, think of it as like a feeling that hits you when something important happens, something that matters to you.
Makes sense.
Like in babies, emotions are crucial for survival.
Yeah.
It's how they tell us what they need. A cry means, hey, I need something. A smile means, I'm good. It's their first language.
So it's their way of saying, I'm okay, or help,
Mm-hmm.
without actually talking.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just signals, right? It also helps them figure out how to deal with stuff around them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think about a baby seeing something new. Curiosity might make them go check it out. Fear might make them back off. It directs their behavior.
So cool.
And these emotions aren't random, they come from a mix of things.
Yeah.
Our biology, our brain specifically,
Mm.
certain areas like the amygdala, that's like the emotion center, and the prefrontal cortex that helps us think things through and control our feelings. These areas develop over time and play a huge role.
But our experiences play a part too, right?
Totally. How we think about things, what we pay attention to, and the strategies we learn to manage our feelings are super important. And then you've got the environment. Our culture, our relationships, especially with parents or caregivers, and any stress we deal with, all of it shapes how our emotions develop.
Speaking of stress, I remember reading about how your genes and stressful environments can team up and impact how you react emotionally.
Right, that's gene-environment interaction. Like there's this gene related to serotonin, which affects your mood. Some
Mhm.
people have a variation that might make them a little more likely to get depressed, but only if they go through a lot of stress. The interesting thing is, even if you have that gene, if you learn how to manage your emotions well, it can really lower your chances of becoming depressed, especially during those tough teenage years.
So it's not just about your genes, but how you handle your feelings. That's powerful stuff.
Definitely. Being able to regulate your emotions can help you deal with both your genes and the stress around you.
It sounds like culture has a surprisingly big impact too, right?
Absolutely. Different cultures express and value emotions differently. Like babies in East Asian cultures tend to show less intense emotions compared to Western babies.
Huh, that's interesting.
And it often continues as they grow. East Asian parents usually encourage more emotional control in their kids. It's also interesting how parents react when kids get upset. Japanese parents often try to prevent negative emotions in the first place, while U.S. parents are more likely to respond after their child is already upset and then help them cope. It shows us that what's considered normal emotionally really depends on where you come from.
So different approaches, but the same goal, right?
Yeah, healthy emotional development.
So we keep talking about managing emotions. Is there a term for that? Why is it so important?
It's called emotion regulation. It's basically how we control the intensity of our emotions and how we express them so we can handle different situations and reach our goals.
Right.
It's a really key skill, and if you're not good at it, it can mess things up.
Oh, how so?
Like, research has shown that people who struggle with emotion regulation also have weaker executive functions. That's like planning, organizing, problem solving.
Hmm.
They can also have trouble in school, with moral reasoning, with stress, and even in their friendships.
Makes sense. It's like a foundation for development in so many ways.
Exactly. And those early relationships, especially with parents or caregivers, really shape how we learn to regulate emotions. Like secure attachment to caregivers, especially mothers in early childhood, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Kids who feel securely attached are more likely to open up about their tough feelings with their moms. It's like that secure base makes it safe for them to explore and understand those emotions without freaking out.
So if you feel safe and supported, you're more willing to talk about tough stuff and learn how to deal with it.
Right.
You also mentioned emotional competence. How's that different from emotion regulation?
Good question. Emotional competence is broader. It's not just about handling negative emotions, it's about having skills to use your emotions to navigate the social world well. Like, emotion regulation is hitting the brakes on a strong emotion, while emotional competence is knowing how to drive the whole car in different situations.
So one is specific, the other is the whole package.
Pretty much.
Okay, so what are some of the skills that make up emotional competence?
Well, it's being aware of your own feelings, like knowing if you're truly sad or just kind of anxious. It's also about recognizing how others are feeling by reading their faces and body language.
Makes sense.
And using the right words to talk about emotions, having empathy for others, understanding that your inner feelings might not match how you show them outwardly, knowing how to cope with negative emotions in a healthy way, understanding how your emotions affect your relationships, and feeling like you have control over your emotional life.
Wow, that's a lot.
Right. But basically, it's about knowing your own emotions and the emotions of those around you and using them to build strong, healthy relationships.
Sounds like a superpower.
It kind of is.
So let's dive into how emotions develop, starting with babies. What are those first emotions we see?
Those are primary emotions. They're basic, found in humans and even animals, and show up within the first 6 months.
Which ones are they?
Think surprise, interest, joy, anger, sadness, fear, disgust.
Like those adorable surprise baby faces.
Exactly. And as they grow, more complex emotions emerge. Those are the self-conscious emotions, usually after 18 months. They need self-awareness, like knowing you're separate from others. These are emotions like jealousy, empathy, embarrassment, pride, shame, guilt.
More complicated feelings.
Right. But even the timeline of these emotions is debated, like jealousy. Some research says it appears around 18 months, but others think we see signs much earlier, even at 6 months.
How can they tell?
There was this study where 6-month-old babies got upset when their mothers paid attention to a doll. Some saw this as jealousy, others as frustration at not getting the attention. More recent brainwave studies suggest that responses related to jealousy might actually develop earlier than we thought.
Fascinating. How do infants express their emotions in those early interactions?
That's how they build their relationships, It's a back and forth. Parents adjust to their baby, babies respond to their parents. When it works well, it's like a dance. Both are in sync.
They're responding to each other's emotional states.
Exactly. And the caregiver's emotions really matter. Studies show that when moms are positive, babies smile and laugh more. Parental stress means fewer happy expressions. A mother's sensitivity to her baby's needs is linked to less fear in the baby. And as they get a bit older, how parents talk about emotions influences toddlers' sharing and helping behaviors.
What about those early tools babies have, crying and smiling?
Those are key. Cries, whether for hunger, frustration, or pain, it's their main way of communication. Smiles also develop, from those early reflexive smiles to the social smile around 4 weeks in response to interaction.
So cute.
Yeah, and then there's fear. One early form is stranger anxiety, that wariness or distress around unfamiliar people. Starts around 6 months, gets stronger by 9 months, and peaks at the end of the first year. But not all babies react the same. It depends on the situation and then the stranger. A friendly stranger in a familiar place will probably get a different reaction than someone imposing in a new place.
So context is key. How do babies learn to handle those big feelings?
It's gradual, In the first year, they rely on their caregivers to soothe them, things like rocking, singing, and touch. As they become more aware, they start doing things like sucking their fingers or looking away from something upsetting. Around 2, they start using words to describe their feelings. Feel bad, dog scare, that sort of thing. This helps caregivers help them better.
Words make a difference.
Big time. Maternal sensitivity, how in tune and responsive a mother is linked to better regulation skills. But infants of mothers with depression, who might not do as much soothing, might struggle more. The good news is there are interventions that teach mothers soothing techniques, which help both of them.
So much happens in that first year.
So much.
Let's talk about early childhood, the preschool years. How do emotions change as kids get more independent and start interacting with the world more?
As their sense of self grows, their self-conscious emotions really take off. They feel pride in their achievements, shame when they mess up, embarrassment socially, and guilt when they know they did something wrong. And parents' reactions have a huge impact, like saying you should feel bad about hitting your friend can really trigger shame or guilt in a young child.
They're learning what's expected of them and how their actions make others feel.
Exactly. And they also start understanding emotions better. They realize that certain situations lead to specific emotions. A birthday party means joy. Losing a toy means sadness. They learn that faces show how someone feels, that emotions affect behavior, and that you can even use your emotions to influence others.
Interesting.
There's even a link between understanding emotions and pro-social behavior, like helping a friend or sharing.
If you know someone is sad, you're more likely to comfort them.
Right. Their vocabulary for emotions also grows rapidly between 2 and 4. They understand causes and consequences better. By 4 or 5, they can reflect on their emotions more, understand that the same event can make different people feel differently, and they become more aware of managing their emotions to fit in.
Self-control kicks in.
Yes, and they can even describe simple coping strategies for stress, like deep breaths or asking for help. There are programs like the Emotion-Based Prevention Program that help young kids understand emotions better.
It sounds like early childhood is key for building emotional intelligence.
It really is. And we can't forget emotion regulation during these years.
Right.
It's crucial for social competence and linked to executive functions. There's research focusing on kids in poverty, trying to find ways to improve their emotion regulation, often through interventions that boost caregiver expressiveness.
Interesting approach.
And being able to manage emotions affects their relationships with other kids. Moody or negative kids are more likely to be rejected, while positive kids who regulate well tend to be more popular.
Makes sense. So as kids move into elementary and middle school, those middle and late childhood years, how does their emotional world change?
They get much better at understanding and managing emotions. But tough situations can still be hard. Research shows that struggling with emotion regulation can actually predict problems like acting out in adolescence.
So those early skills really matter long term.
For sure. During these years, they understand emotions in a much more complex way. They grasp more complex emotions like pride and shame, and these become less about what others think and more about their own standards and sense of responsibility.
They develop their own internal compass.
Yes, and they can even do this mental time travel with emotions. They can think about how they might feel in the future and remember how they felt in the past.
That's great.
They also get better at hiding negative emotions and start using strategies like distracting themselves when they're upset. They also understand the chain of events that lead to emotions. I'm sad because earlier, that kind of thing. And importantly, empathy keeps developing. That ability to truly get how someone else is feeling.
Such a crucial skill for social and emotional growth. What about how they handle stress and challenges? Does that change?
They get better at assessing stressful situations and understanding their control over them. They also get better at finding ways to cope and use strategies like changing their perspective or reframing things positively.
So they become more proactive.
Exactly. By 10, most kids can use these strategies well. But kids in unsupportive or traumatic homes might be so stressed that they can't use these strategies easily. And exposure to disasters and trauma can have really bad effects. Research shows that the more severe the trauma, the worse the potential problems.
Like what kind of problems?
Things like acute stress reactions, depression, even post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's heavy. What can we do to help kids cope with these experiences?
A few things. Reassure them they're safe. Let them talk about what happened and listen patiently. Encourage them to talk about their feelings and validate those feelings. Help them make sense of it in a way they can understand, and protect them from repeated exposure to triggers and reminders of the trauma.
So create a safe space and provide support.
Exactly. And mental health professionals are crucial for kids who have experienced trauma.
So important to remember that. Now, what about adolescence? Is it really as emotionally intense as everyone says?
Well, early adolescence, those middle and high school years, can be a time when people report being less happy overall. Mood swings and fluctuating emotions are normal.
So it's not all just hormones.
Right. While hormones do matter, research says their impact is smaller than we think. It's more about navigating social stuff, relationships with peers and family, and figuring out who they are.
Makes more sense.
As we move into adulthood and aging, our emotional experiences keep changing. What we see is that emotional intelligence, that ability to understand and manage emotions, becomes even more important for dealing with life's curveballs. People start consciously trying to create lives that are emotionally fulfilling, predictable, and manageable, whether it's their jobs, relationships, or how they live day to day.
So they're making choices to build a good life.
Exactly. And being able to incorporate those emotional experiences into daily life and relationships in a healthy way becomes really important.
Do men and women handle stress differently in adulthood?
Research suggests there might be some differences. Women seem more affected by social stressors, especially relationship issues. They're also slightly more likely to get depressed after stressful events. Men often show a fight or flight response to stress, maybe becoming aggressive, withdrawing, or turning to substances. Women are more likely to tend and befriend, seeking social support, especially from other women. It's thought that the hormone oxytocin, linked to nurturing, might play a role in this.
Interesting. So what about older adults? How does their emotional experience look?
It's actually more positive than many think. Older adults say they're better at controlling their emotions. On average, they experience more positive emotions and fewer negative ones. There's this theory called socio-emotional selectivity theory, suggesting that as people age, their perception of time changes, so they prioritize emotional goals, like deepening close relationships and maximizing their happiness in the moment.
Makes sense. You focus on what matters most.
Right. Their social circles often shrink, but the quality of those relationships becomes even more important.
Strong bonds over large numbers.
Exactly. Interestingly, though, social engagement among people in their late 50s and early 60s might be weaker now than in the past, leading to suggestions for programs to increase connection in this age group.
So staying connected is still important as your age. And what about attachment? Does it still matter in adulthood and older age?
Definitely. The attachment styles we develop early on can affect our adult romantic relationships. Secure attachment usually means more satisfying and stable partnerships.
So those early bonds have a lasting impact.
They do, but big life events and consistent relationship experiences can lead to changes in attachment styles. Also, attachment anxiety, that need for constant reassurance, tends to decrease with age. Secure attachment in older adulthood is linked to better well-being, both mentally and physically.
But insecure attachment can create problems.
Yes, things like increased caregiver burden when caring for a spouse with Alzheimer's and a higher risk of social isolation in older women with avoidant attachment.
It seems those early patterns have a long reach. But there's room for change, too.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about temperament.
Okay, what exactly is temperament? We hear it all the time about babies and kids.
It's basically your natural behavior style and how you react emotionally. Think of it like your built-in emotional and behavioral wiring.
So how we're basically set up from the start.
Right. Researchers have different ways of classifying temperament. One of the oldest is by Chess and Thomas, who identified 3 types. Easy babies, who are generally happy, have regular routines, and adapt well. Difficult babies, who are fussy, have irregular routines, and adapt slowly. And slow to warm up, babies who are quieter, a bit negative at first, but adjust gradually.
So different personalities from the get-go.
Exactly. They found these styles were somewhat stable throughout childhood.
Hmm.
Interestingly, kids with difficult temperaments seemed more sensitive to their environment, doing better in good quality childcare.
So a good environment can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Another researcher, Jerome Kagan, focused on behavioral inhibition, the tendency to be shy versus outgoing. He looked at how infants and young kids react to new things, whether they avoid or explore. His research suggested this shyness can be pretty consistent from infancy to early childhood and might even be linked to social anxiety later.
Interesting. Any other ways to understand temperament?
Yes, a popular one is by Rothbard and Bates. They focus on 3 dimensions. Extroversion surgency, which is about being outgoing, positive, and active. Negative affectivity, which is about experiencing negative emotions. And effortful control, which is about attention, self-control, and self-soothing.
So a broader view.
Right. This model has been linked to a lot of things, like eating habits, anger expression, academic success, even ADHD.
So temperament affects lots of areas of life.
It does. Now, what about gender and culture? Do they play a role in temperament?
I'm curious about that, too.
Gender can definitely influence how people react to a child's temperament. Parents might unknowingly encourage certain behaviors based on whether the baby is a boy or a girl. And culture can impact what's seen as a good temperament. For example, behavioral inhibition, which might be seen as shyness here, is more valued in places like China, where it's linked to being thoughtful and harmonious.
So different strokes for different folks.
Exactly.
How do these early temperamental tendencies play out as we grow? Do they last?
There are some interesting connections. Easy kids tend to adjust better in young adulthood, while difficult kids might face challenges like lower education levels or marital problems. Early shyness has been linked to shyness and less assertiveness in adults, maybe even less social support and later entry into work. But surprisingly, not being inhibited early on has been linked to more stable careers. And our emotion regulation in childhood matters too. Good early control tends to mean better adult emotion management, while high reactivity in childhood might even increase the risk of depression in adulthood.
So our early years really set the stage.
In many ways. But it's not just about those early tendencies. Our genes, our environment, they all interact.
What about that goodness of fit idea?
Right, it's about how well a child's temperament matches their environment. If it's a bad fit, especially for kids who get easily distressed or struggle to adapt, it can be tough. That's where sensitive parenting comes in, understanding and responding to their individual needs.
So meeting them where they are.
Exactly. And structuring their environment in a supportive way. It's super important to avoid labeling them as difficult because that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Research shows that positive parenting, with warmth and not too much control, can actually help kids improve their self-control.
So nurture can make a big difference.
Definitely. And then you have theories like differential susceptibility and biological sensitivity to context, suggesting that kids with difficult temperaments might be more vulnerable to bad environments, but also thrive more in really supportive ones.
Interesting. So what might seem like a problem can actually be a sign of sensitivity to both good and bad.
Yes, exactly.
All right, let's talk about attachment and love. It's such a basic human thing. How does our social world start to form in infancy?
From birth, babies are incredibly social. They're driven to connect and understand social interactions. Even really young babies can perceive and understand basic social exchanges. Eye-tracking studies have shown
They're
this.
observing everything.
Totally. By 2 or 3 months, they react differently to people versus objects, showing more positive emotions to people. They develop expectations for positive interactions, like in that famous still face experiment where they get upset when a playful caregiver suddenly becomes unresponsive.
It shows how much they crave that connection.
Right. And as they get older, they interact more with other babies, especially in childcare.
So their social world expands.
Yes, and crawling and then walking lets them explore and initiate social interactions more.
They become little explorers.
Exactly. They also start understanding intention and goal-directed behavior in others, which is key for complex social engagement. And around the end of their first year, they start social referencing, looking to their caregivers' expressions to guide their own behavior in new situations.
They're learning how to read the room.
Right. It's all about taking in social cues and using them to navigate their world.
So let's get into attachment itself. What is it and how does it develop?
It's that deep, lasting bond between two people, usually a baby and their primary caregiver. Harlow's monkey studies showed how important contact comfort is for forming these bonds.
The need for touch and closeness.
Exactly. Bowlby's theory says that both babies and caregivers are biologically wired for attachment. He proposed that it goes through 4 phases in the first year, leading to what he called an internal working model of attachment.
What's that exactly?
It's like a mental picture of the caregiver, the relationship, and the baby's own sense of worthiness. This model can affect their later relationships and development, even their understanding of emotions and their self-concept.
Powerful stuff. And we know there are different attachment styles, right?
Yes, Mary Ainsworth developed the strange situation, where they observe how babies react when separated from and reunited with their mothers. This helps classify them into different attachment styles.
Can you explain the different styles?
There's secure attachment, where babies use mom as a secure base, get upset when she leaves, but are comforted when she returns. Then there's insecure avoidant, where babies seem indifferent to mom's presence, don't get too upset when she leaves, and might even avoid her when she comes back.
Like they've shut down emotionally.
In a way. Then you have insecure resistant babies who are clingy and anxious even when mom is there, get super distressed when she leaves, and are hard to comfort when she returns, showing both anger and clinginess. And finally, there's insecure disorganized, which is a newer category, where babies show confused, contradictory behaviors, sometimes freezing or looking dazed and fearful.
Sounds more serious.
It's often associated with neglect or abuse. Now, it's important to note that the strange situation might not be perfect for all cultures. For example, German and Japanese babies often show different patterns that might be misinterpreted if you don't consider their cultural norms.
So culture plays a role even in attachment.
Absolutely. But overall, secure attachment is the most common style across cultures.
That's good to hear. So what does research say about the long-term effects of these early attachment styles?
Secure attachment in infancy has been linked to a lot of positive outcomes, like better emotional health, higher self-esteem, stronger social skills, better peer relationships, less conflict with friends, and even greater resilience when facing challenges.
So a good start can really set them up for success.
It seems that way. On the other hand, kids who are insecurely attached both to mom and dad have been linked to more externalizing problems like aggression and rule breaking.
So both parents' attachment matters.
It does. But there's also debate on how much early attachment predicts later outcomes. Some researchers point to things like parental divorce as being stronger predictors of insecurity later on.
So it's not just about that initial bond.
Right. Consistent positive caregiving seems to be key. It's not like a one-and-done situation.
Makes sense.
And there are also alternative views. Like, some argue that babies are more resilient than we think and that temperament matters more. They also emphasize that different cultures have different ways of socializing kids, so what's considered secure might look different.
Different ways of showing love and connection.
Exactly.
So what are the caregiving styles that typically lead to different attachment patterns?
Securely attached babies usually have caregivers who are sensitive and consistently available.
They feel seen and heard.
Right. Avoidant babies often have caregivers who are emotionally unavailable or rejecting.
That's sad.
Yes. Resistant babies often have caregivers who are inconsistent and maybe less affectionate.
They don't know what to expect.
Exactly. And disorganized babies, sadly, often have caregivers who are neglectful or abusive. The good news is that there are interventions that can help improve parent-infant attachment.
So there's hope for change.
Definitely. Now, there's also this whole field called developmental social neuroscience, which looks at the brain regions, neurochemicals, and hormones involved in attachment.
Sounds complex.
It is. But they've found that areas like the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, hypothalamus, and nucleus accumbens, along with neurotransmitters like dopamine and hormones like oxytocin, all play a role.
Wow. So many parts of the brain are involved.
It's complex, and both mothers and fathers are important caregivers. We're seeing more stay-at-home dads now. Research shows that fathers can be just as sensitive and responsive as mothers.
That's great to hear.
And dads being involved is linked to better cognitive development in kids. They often interact differently, though. Mothers might focus more on caregiving, while fathers are more playful and do more rough-and-tumble play.
Different styles, but both important.
Exactly. And of course, parents' mental health matters, too.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about childcare? How does that impact attachment?
In the U.S., a lot of kids are in childcare. Our parental leave policies are way behind Europe and places like Sweden. And childcare varies a lot, from centers to homes with differing quality.
Right.
Studies have linked having multiple childcare arrangements to more behavioral problems. High-quality care matters, with good caregiver interactions, a stimulating environment, and good adult-child ratios. The NICHD SCC-WADI study found that most early care is low quality, positive interactions are rare, low-income kids have lower quality care, and high-quality care is linked to better cognitive and social outcomes. Spending more hours in care, though, was linked to less optimal development.
So quality over quantity.
Yes, but they also found that family factors are even stronger predictors than childcare, and the worst outcomes were for kids with both a bad home environment and bad childcare.
So both matter.
Definitely. One researcher, McCartney, gave some advice. Focus on your parenting quality, watch your kids' development closely, and find the best care you can.
Solid advice. How does attachment change in middle and late childhood?
It gets more sophisticated, less time with the parents. Secure attachment is linked to fewer internalizing problems, anxiety, depression, and better emotion regulation. And parenting that's responsive, autonomy supportive, and less harsh is linked to secure attachment.
So the parent-child relationship is still crucial.
Definitely. In adolescence, it continues to be important. Attachment to parents is linked to well-being, and secure attachment is linked to competent behavior, like good peer relationships and emotion regulation.
Makes sense. What about romantic relationships? When do those start to emerge?
That's when dating comes in, and it goes beyond just romance. It's also about recreation, status, and learning about relationships. There are 3 stages: entry into attraction, exploring relationships through casual or group dating, and consolidating dyadic bonds, which are more serious relationships.
So they gradually get more serious.
Right. Kids who start dating early, the early bloomers, tend to have more externalized problems than you have the late bloomers.
Different paces for different kids.
Definitely. And culture plays a huge role in how dating unfolds.
How so?
Cultural values and beliefs affect things like the appropriate age for dating, how much freedom kids have, whether chaperones are needed, and gender roles in dating. Immigrant adolescents often face cultural conflicts, and online dating is becoming more common.
So a lot of factors at play.
Yes. Now, moving into adulthood, attachment continues to be important. Romantic partners start fulfilling similar needs as parents did for children.
Providing that secure base.
Right. Research has linked infant attachment to adult attachment patterns, though stressful life events can weaken the link.
So there's continuity, but also room for change.
Exactly. There's a model of adult attachment styles by Hazan and Shaver. They identified 3 styles: secure, avoidant, and anxious. Securely attached adults are comfortable with closeness and intimacy. Avoidant adults are uncomfortable with closeness and might be distrustful. And anxious adults crave closeness but are less trusting and might be jealous.
Different ways of relating to others.
Right. Most adults are securely attached, which is great because they tend to have more satisfying, trusting, and long-lasting relationships and better well-being overall. Insecure attachment, on the other hand, is linked to negative emotions, stress, feeling rejected, trouble sleeping, social anxiety, risky health behaviors, and even worse, physical health.
So secure attachment is really beneficial.
It is. And while attachment styles are somewhat stable, they can change over time.
That's good to know.
And as we age, we see some interesting trends. Attachment anxiety decreases, and secure attachment is linked to well-being and later life. Insecure attachment can lead to more caregiver burden for those caring for loved ones with illnesses like Alzheimer's. Avoidant attachment in older women can lead to more social isolation.
It's all connected, even into old age.
Definitely. Now, romantic love, also known as passionate love or eros, is about that intense attraction and infatuation.
Butterflies and exciting.
Exactly. Research suggests sexual desire is key. It's also full of complex emotions like fear, anger, joy, and jealousy. Ironically, romantic lovers are more likely to make you depressed.
Wow, that's surprising.
Right. Online dating is changing the game too. It has advantages for shy people, but there's the risk of misrepresentation. Interestingly, though, online relationships are slightly more likely to last over 2 years, and marriages from online dating are a bit less likely to break up.
So they can actually work.
They can. And in emerging adulthood, those late teens and early 20s, we see more short-term relationships, while long-term relationships become more supportive and less negative. Culture also plays a role. Individualistic cultures like the US might emphasize passion more, while collectivist cultures might focus more on how love fits into family and social obligations.
Different values, different ways of expressing love.
Exactly. Sternberg's triangular theory of love breaks love down into 3 parts: passion, intimacy, and commitment.
So it's not just one thing.
Right. Different combinations lead to different kinds of love. Infatuation is just passion. Affectionate love is intimacy and commitment. Fatuous love is passion and commitment without intimacy. And consummate love, the ideal, is all 3 strong.
So there are different flavors of love.
Yes. And falling out of love can have negative consequences, so it's important to recognize unhealthy relationships.
That's important advice. What does research say about breakups?
Breakups can actually lead to personal